It was the most dangerous mistake of her life, and it saved them both. She just sat down at the wrong table in a packed restaurant, a simple error, but the man across from her didn't tell her to leave. He told her to stay perfectly still, because the two hitmen watching from the bar now thought she was his wife. Her name was Elena Rossi. His was Adrian Volkov. And in that frozen moment, her simple error became the only thing standing between him and a bullet. This is the real, documented world of contract killings and mistaken identity, where ordinary people are pulled into the crosshairs of organized crime every single day. So what happens when the hitmen realize their mistake? To understand how a simple dinner reservation could become a death sentence, you need to understand the two worlds that collided that night. First, Elena Rossi, 28, an architectural consultant who believed in order, plans, and quiet Friday nights. Her biggest worry was a demanding client, not a double-tap skull. She booked a table for one at Il Cielo, an upscale Italian spot, to celebrate landing a new project. She was early, flustered from traffic, and the maitre d' simply pointed toward the back. Elena weaved through the packed dining room, past the candlelit tables and the low murmur of conversation, and slid into the first empty booth she saw. She never saw the two men in dark suits at the bar stop talking. She never noticed their eyes lock onto her, because across from her, a man looked up from his phone. His name was Adrian Volkov, and his world operated on an entirely different set of rules. A world where, according to global crime monitors, at least 2,700 contract killings are ordered every single year. Adrian was in the business of making sure he wasn't one of them. He was a forensic accountant, the man criminal empires hired to make their illicit money vanish, and then, more dangerously, to testify against them when deals went sour. He was the reason the U.S. Marshals had relocated and given new identities to over 19,000 witnesses. And tonight he was a dead man walking. He'd agreed to meet his protective detail here, a public place he thought was safe, but they were late. And the two men at the bar, professionals who'd been paid an average of $15,000 for this job, were not. When Elena sat down, Adrian's blood went cold. His real contact, the marshal posing as his wife, was supposed to arrive any second. This woman was a stranger, a catastrophic variable. The hitmen, relying on a grainy photo and a description of a woman meeting a man at this table, now had visual confirmation. The wife had arrived. The clock started. Adrian made a split-second calculation. If he told her to leave, the hitmen would see her panic, realize their briefing was wrong, and might open fire immediately in the crowded restaurant. If she stayed, she bought him time. His voice was low, calm, utterly at odds with the warning in his eyes. Don't get up. Don't look at the bar. Just play along. Elena stared, halfway between annoyance and confusion. I think there's been a mistake. This is my table. It is now, he said, his hand reaching across to gently rest on her forearm, an intimate gesture for the watchers. Please, play the part. For the next 60 seconds, he painted a terrifying picture with whispers. He told her about the men at the bar. He told her what they were hired to do. He explained that in the documented history of witness protection, no participant following the rules has been killed under active protection, but that protection hadn't arrived yet. Her mistake was now her prison. Every laugh from another table, every clink of silverware, was the hammer cocking on a gun. This is the chilling reality of targeted violence. Research from the U.S. Secret Service shows these acts are almost never spontaneous. They are planned, with warning signs and surveillance. The hitmen had done theirs. They knew the location, the target, and the cover story, a marital argument that would end in a tragic public murder. Elena Rossi, by pure chance, had just stepped into the role of the doomed wife. She sat frozen, her mind racing from disbelief to raw terror. She watched Adrian's face, seeing the absolute certainty there. This was not a joke. This was not a pickup line. This was life and death in a room smelling of garlic and expensive wine. She managed a stiff, terrified smile, mirroring his false affection. Good, he murmured, his thumb stroking her wrist once, a signal to the watchers. Now listen very carefully. When I squeeze your hand, you drop to the floor and don't get up. Do you understand? She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Across the room, one of the suits slid off his bar stool. He didn't move toward them. He moved toward the restrooms, a path that would take him right behind their booth. The classic pincer movement, isolate and eliminate. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his eyes tracked the man in the reflection of his polished knife. Time was up. The second hitman remained at the bar, a lookout, his hand casually in his jacket pocket. The stage was set in one of the most common locations for violence, a public business. And the weapon, according to 1,000 crime reports, was likely already in the building, hidden until the last possible second. Adrian had one card left to play. He leaned in as if to kiss Alina's cheek, his lips beside her ear. His whisper was the last thread holding her sanity together. They're making their move. On my signal, get down. And pray my backup isn't stuck in traffic. He slowly moved his free hand beneath the tablecloth. Alina's eyes widened. What are you doing? What I should have done an hour ago, he said, and he squeezed her hand. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and shouting. Alina dropped, her knees hitting the hard floor as a deafening crash erupted above her. Not a gunshot. Adrian had thrown the entire table forward, sending glasses, plates, and cutlery flying into the path of the approaching hitman. It wasn't an attack. It was a chaos grenade. The restaurant erupted, screams, chairs scraping. The second hitman at the bar stood, his hand now clearly gripping a weapon beneath his jacket. But he froze. Because from the kitchen doors, 2 men and a woman burst through, badges held high, shouts of U.S. Marshals. Get down, cutting through the panic. Adrian's backup had arrived, not with sirens, but through the back alley. The hitman near the booth, now sprawled among broken china, made eye contact with his partner. A single, almost imperceptible shake of the head. Abort. In an instant, both men melted into the fleeing crowd, becoming ghosts in the chaos they'd helped create. Alina was hauled to her feet by a marshal, a woman with fierce eyes who scanned her for injuries. Are you hit? Are you hurt? Alina could only shake her head, trembling violently. She was shoved behind the cover of the overturned booth next to Adrian, who was already speaking in a low, rapid-fire tone to another agent. They were professionals. They had the layout. They knew I was waiting for a female contact. The lead marshal, a man named Carter, looked grim. Your safe house is compromised. The meat location was compromised. This wasn't an ambush, Volkov. This was a pinpoint extraction attempt. Someone gave you up. That was the first major pivot. This wasn't a random criminal hit. This was an inside job. The very system designed to protect Adrian had a leak. And Alina Rossi, an architect who liked quiet Fridays, was now a material witness to an attempted assassination of a federal protectee. Her life, as she knew it, ended in that moment. She was rushed out a service entrance into a waiting, unmarked sedan, Adrian beside her. No explanations, no apologies, just grim procedure. This is the brutal machinery of witness protection. You don't get to go home. You don't get to pack a bag. You vanish. As the U.S. Marshals Service states, protected witnesses and their families must give up everything. Their homes, their names, their pasts. For Alina, the gravity of that sank in during the silent, tense ride to a nondescript office building. In a sterile interrogation room, Carter laid out her new reality. Miss Rossi, you have 2 choices. Option 1, you sign a statement about what you saw tonight, we put you in a hotel for a few days, and you go back to your life. Adrian, leaning against the wall, let out a hollow laugh. She goes back to her life and she's dead within the week. They saw her face. They'll assume she's connected. They'll clean up the loose end. Carter didn't disagree. Which brings us to option 2. You enter protective custody. Indefinitely, we relocate you. New identity, new city, no contact with anyone from your old life, ever. Alina felt the walls closing in. I didn't ask for this, I just sat at the wrong table. And in doing so, Adrian said quietly, you saved my life. They hesitated because of you. That hesitation gave the marshals their window. You are now the one person who can definitively identify 2 contract killers who work for a very motivated organization. That makes you priceless. And a target. The pressure was a physical weight. They presented her with data, with cold statistics. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime tracks these killings. The groups that order them have global reach and long memories. They showed her case files of mistaken identity hits, like the Florida mother kidnapped and murdered after being wrongly identified, her killers realizing their error but finishing the job anyway. "This is the business," Carter said. "You are now a business problem." For 24 hours, Alina sat in a safe room, cycling between terror, anger, and numb disbelief. Adrian was kept separate, but he sent a message to her through a marshal. It contained 2 words, "I'm sorry," and a file. It was a heavily redacted dossier on the organization hunting him, the Voronin Syndicate, a network with tentacles in energy, cyber theft, and political corruption. Adrian had been their money man. He'd helped them launder over $200 million, and then he decided to testify. His testimony could put away not just thugs, but a sitting city commissioner and 3 Fortune 500 CEOs. The hit at Il Silo wasn't about revenge. It was about preserving a multi-billion-dollar empire. Alina was starring at the reason for 2,700 contract killings worldwide. Not passion, not rage, business. The next morning, pale and resolved, she looked at Marshal Carter. "What do I need to do?" The process was clinical. Fingerprints, DNA sample, a lifetime of personal history excavated for details that could never be used again. She was given a new name, Clara Mitchell. A bland, forgettable name. A social security number attached to a ghost, a backstory she had to memorize. She was a graphic designer from Dayton, moving for a fresh start. As the marshals prepared her for transit, Adrian was brought in for a final, monitored debrief. He looked exhausted. "The leak," he said to Carter, not looking at Alina. "It has to be in the prosecutor's office or yours. They knew the protocol. They knew the meat was a wife." Carter's jaw tightened. "We're auditing, but until we find it, we run dark. No more protocol. We're taking you to separate secondary sites." For the first time, Adrian looked directly at Alina. His calm facade had a crack, showing the raw guilt beneath. "I will make sure you get a life after this, I promise." It was a promise he had no power to keep, and they both knew it. They were loaded into separate, armored vehicles in the dead of night. Alina's vehicle headed north. Adrian's went west. She watched the city lights fade, clutching a file folder containing the life of Clara Mitchell. She thought of her apartment, her plants, the project deadline she'd missed. All of it gone. The safe house was a small, secluded cabin in a remote wooded area. It was equipped with cameras, motion sensors, and a panic button. For 3 days, nothing happened. Just the eerie silence of the woods and the occasional check-in from a rotating pair of marshals. Alina, now Clara, tried to settle into her new skin. She practiced her story. She did puzzles. She waited. And on the 4th night, the motion sensors at the tree line tripped. Not an animal. The alert showed 2 thermal signatures moving with slow, deliberate precision toward the cabin. The marshals in the house went rigid. "Get her to the safe room. Now." Alina was rushed into a fortified closet in the basement, the door a slab of steel. She heard the muffled sounds above, tense radio chatter, the clicking of weapons. Then a voice crackled over the marshal's radio, loud enough for her to hear. It was Carter from a command post miles away. His voice was strained. "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Those are not hostiles. They are friendly assets conducting a perimeter verification." One of the marshals in the cabin hissed into his mic. "Verification at 0200 without notifying us. That's a breach command." A long silence followed. Then Carter's voice returned, colder now. "Stand down. Let them verify, acknowledge." The marshal looked at his partner, a mixture of fury and dread on his face. He keyed his mic. "Acknowledged." Alina, in the dark closet, felt a new kind of cold seep into her bones. The leak wasn't just in some office, it was in command. The people hunting Adrian had badges. The footsteps entered the cabin above her. They moved through the rooms, methodical, unhurried. They stopped right outside the basement door. The doorknob turned. The marshals in the cabin had their weapons trained on the basement entrance, fingers on triggers, but Carter's order held them frozen. The door opened and 2 figures descended. They weren't in tactical gear. They wore jackets over collared shirts. They looked like auditors, but their eyes scanned the room like predators. One held up a credential. "Internal Affairs, Witness Security Division. We're here to verify secure transport protocols were followed. Where is the protectee?" The lead marshal, a man named Finn, didn't lower his weapon. "You verify through command. Not in my safe house in the middle of the night without the proper chain. The IA officer smiled, a thin, cold thing. Command sent us, Marshal. That is the chain, now the protectee, Clara Mitchell. Alina, hearing every word through the steel door, held her breath. Finn hesitated. The standoff lasted 5 eternal seconds. Then the second IA officer moved, not toward the safe room but toward the security panel on the wall. He studied it, then pulled a small device from his pocket and plugged it into a port. "What are you doing?" Finn demanded. "Auditing your system logs," the man said without looking back, "making sure there have been no external breaches." But Alina, watching the small monitor inside her closet, a feed from a hidden camera in the basement, saw his fingers move too quickly for simple review. He was typing, he was inputting commands. A moment later, the monitor flickered and went dead. All the security feeds cut. Finn saw it too. He shifted his stance, his weapon now centering on the officer at the panel. "Step away from the system, now." That's when the first officer drew his gun, not pointed at Finn but at the other marshal. "This is your last chance to comply with an internal review, gentlemen. Do not make this a career-ending incident." The room was a powder keg. And then a new voice crackled over the radio, a voice Alina hadn't heard before. It was Marshal Carter, but he sounded different, strained, out of breath. "Finn, do not trust IA. Repeat, IA is compromised." They're not. A scuffle, a thud. The transmission died into static. The IA officers' faces hardened. The game was up. Finn didn't hesitate. "Drop your weapons," he shouted. What happened next was a violent, close-quarters blur. Shouts. The deafening roar of gunfire in the confined space. Alina screamed, pressing her hands over her ears, curling into a ball. It was over in seconds. Silence, then the sound of a body hitting the concrete floor. Then a fist pounded on her door. "Clara, it's Finn. Open up. We have to move now." Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the latch. When the door swung open, Finn was there, a cut on his forehead, his weapon still smoking. The other marshal was on the ground, moaning, clutching his leg. One of the imposters was dead. The other was gone, having fled up the stairs. "They were Voronin," Finn gasped, pulling her out. "They had real credentials. The leak, it's deep. Carter was trying to warn us. They must have gotten to him." This was the "it gets worse" moment. The corruption wasn't just a mole. It was a takeover. The syndicate had infiltrated the oversight mechanism of the witness protection program itself. They could find anyone, they could access any safe house. The system was poison. Finn shoved a backpack into her arms. "Food, water, cash, burner phone. You run, you get as far from here as you can. You do not trust anyone who says they're a marshal unless they give you this code phrase." He whispered 3 words in her ear. "Now go, out the back, into the woods. Run and don't stop." He turned to help his wounded partner. Alina, propelled by pure adrenaline, burst out the cabin's rear exit and into the freezing, pitch-black forest. She ran blindly, branches whipping her face, the backpack thumping against her spine. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave way, collapsing behind a fallen log. For hours she hid, shaking, listening for pursuit. As dawn broke, she remembered the burner phone. With numb fingers, she turned it on. There was one number pre-programmed. She stared at it, knowing who it likely was. Else was left, she dialed. It rang twice. "Don't talk, just listen." It was Adrian's voice, tight with stress. "If you're calling, your safe house is burned. They'll be tracking any signal from a marshal-issued phone soon. You have maybe 10 minutes. There's a town called Pinecrest, 15 miles east of your last coordinates. A bus station. Look for locker number 17. The combination is your old apartment number backwards. Inside is a different phone, cash, and a key. Use it. Then destroy this one." The line went dead. Alina didn't question it. She smashed the burner phone with a rock, scattered the pieces, and using the dawn light oriented herself east. The journey was a nightmare of paranoia. Every distant engine was a threat. Every person she saw through the trees made her freeze. She was a ghost moving through a world that had suddenly become a hunting ground. She reached Pinecrest, a sleepy mountain town, just as the morning bus arrived. She found the locker. Inside was a sealed package. A cheap prepaid phone, $5,000 in mixed bills, and a single key with a tag that read Lakeview Motel, Room 8. She booked a room under her new, painful identity, Clara Mitchell, and locked herself inside. She was exhausted, traumatized, and utterly alone. She turned on the new phone. A single text message waited from an unknown number. "Are you secure?" It was Adrian. She typed back, "Yes, what is happening?" His reply was slow in coming. "The syndicate didn't just bribe someone. They own a deputy director in the Justice Department. They have access to the secure transport scheduler. They knew every move we were going to make before we made it. The hit at the restaurant, the safe house, it was all using our own blueprint." The revelation was staggering. This wasn't a criminal organization evading the law. It was a criminal organization using the law, turning its protection into a targeting system. Adrian's next message changed everything again. "They aren't just trying to kill me to silence me. They're trying to discredit me. If I die a criminal killed by rivals, my testimony is thrown out. But if I die a liar killed by the corrupt marshal I supposedly bribed, my testimony is poison. You are the key to that. You're the corrupt marshal's pawn, the innocent bystander I manipulated. They need you alive to tell their story." Alina's blood ran cold. She wasn't just a loose end to be tied up. She was a character in a narrative they were writing. Her captivity or her coerced testimony was more valuable than her death. This flipped the script. The hunters didn't want a body in the woods. They wanted a witness on the stand. Adrian's final text that night was a directive. "We can't run. The system is compromised. We have to attack the source. I have evidence, real evidence of the deputy director's corruption, but it's in a physical location, a safety deposit box. I need you to get it." Alina stared at the words. He needed her, the civilian, the mistake, to do what the entire marshal's service could not, because she was the one person the syndicate didn't think was a threat. She was supposed to be a victim, not an operative. She replied, "Where?" The answer came with an address in the city she'd fled and a time, 3 days from now. It was a suicide mission, walking back into the lion's den. But as Alina sat in that dim motel room, she realized the truth Finn had shown her. Hiding was death. The system was broken. Adrian's promise of a life was ashes. The only path forward was through the fire. She had to stop being Clara Mitchell, the witness. She had to become someone they'd never see coming. She spent the next 72 hours planning. She used the cash to buy different clothes, to dye her hair blonde at a drugstore, to study bus routes and the bank's blueprints she found online. She was no longer an architect. She was a student of survival. On the morning of the third day, she boarded a bus heading back toward the city where her old life had ended. She was going to break into a bank, retrieve evidence that could bring down a powerful syndicate and a corrupt government official, and she had to do it while being hunted by both. As the city skyline appeared on the horizon, the city didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a trap waiting to spring. Alina Rossi, now a blonde woman in borrowed sunglasses, moved through the crowded streets with a new awareness. She saw surveillance in every camera, a threat in every loitering man. The bank was a grand, old building downtown, the First Metropolitan Trust. Adrian's instructions were precise. Box 722. The key she'd been given at the motel was for a private viewing room adjacent to the vault, not the box itself. She was to request access, use the room, and wait for further instruction. It felt like walking onto a stage. At 10:15 a.m., she presented a forged driver's license for Clara Mitchell to the severe-looking clerk. "I'd like to access my safety deposit box, please. 722. The clerk gave her a long, appraising look, then nodded. "Right this way." The walk to the vault was a march. The clerk used a master key alongside Alina's key, sliding the long metal box from its housing. "Viewing room 3 is available. Take all the time you need." The room was small, soundproofed, with a table and a single chair. Alina placed the box on the table and opened it. It wasn't full of papers. On top of a stack of documents sat a sleek encrypted smartphone. As she picked it up, it buzzed. A video call request. Adrian's face appeared on the screen. He looked gaunt, like he hadn't slept in days. He was somewhere dark. "You made it," he said, his voice a whisper. "They're watching the bank. But they're watching for me or for a marshal, not for you. Here, what you do." Beneath the phone is a USB drive. It contains digital copies of everything. But beneath that there is a handwritten ledger. That is the original. It has ink signatures, notes in the margin. It's the physical proof that can't be digitally forged. You take the ledger, leave the USB. Then you walk out, go to the central library, and place the ledger inside the copy of Moby Dick in the fiction section, shelf number CC45. Then you leave. Do not look back. Alina found the ledger, a worn, leather-bound book. She tucked it into her inner jacket pocket. And then what? They'll just track me. They'll track the USB, Adrian said, which will be moving in the opposite direction. A decoy. Now go. And Alina, thank you. The screen went black. The plan was audacious. Use her as a mule to move the real evidence, while a digital copy led the hunters on a wild goose chase. She closed the box, signaled to the clerk she was finished, and walked out into the marble lobby. Her heart was a jackhammer. Every step toward the exit felt exposed. Just as she pushed through the rotating doors onto the sunlit street, she saw them. A black sedan idling across the street. The window was down. The man from the bar at Il Silo, the one who'd fled the cabin, sat in the passenger seat. He was looking right at her. Their eyes met. For a split second, there was no recognition. She was a blonde woman in sunglasses. Then his gaze dropped to her hand, still in her jacket pocket, clutching the ledger. His eyes widened. He shouted something to the driver. The car door flew open. Alina ran. She ducked into the first alley she saw, the sounds of shouting and slamming doors echoing behind her. This was the consequence. The plan had failed. They had made her. She sprinted, her mind racing. The library was 12 blocks away. She'd never make it. She had to improvise. She burst out of the alley onto a busy shopping street, melting into the midday crowd. She risked a glance back. Two men, the hitman and a new partner, were pushing through the crowd, scanning heads. She ducked into a large department store, moving through perfumed aisles toward the back exits. She emerged into another alley, this one leading toward the river. The library was to the north. They were behind her. She was cut off. That's when a hand grabbed her arm and yanked her into a darkened doorway. She gasped, ready to fight. "SHHH, it's me." It was Marshall Finn, the one from the cabin. He looked worse for wear, a bandage on his neck, but his eyes were alert. "I've been tracking their comms. They're all over this area. Give me the ledger." Alina recoiled. "How do I know you're not one of them?" Finn grimaced. The code phrase at the cabin, "Midnight sun never sets." It was the phrase he'd given her. A wave of relief washed over her. She started to pull the ledger from her pocket, then she stopped. Something was wrong. The phrase, he said it wrong. At the cabin, he'd whispered 3 words. "The dawn's early light." This was different. He saw her hesitation. His expression changed from urgency to something colder. "Give it to me, Alina. It's over." He was Finn. He was the other one, the imposter from the cabin who'd gotten away. He must have intercepted their communications, learned about the code, but not the exact phrase. In that frozen second, Alina did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. Not a yell, but a full-blooded, attention-shattering scream. "Help! He has a gun!" People on the street turned. The imposter's eyes bulged with panic. He released her arm, stepping back into the shadows as bystanders started to gather. Alina didn't wait. She ran straight into the crowd, past confused shoppers, and spotted a city police officer on a corner. She ran up to him, breathless. "Those men, they're following me. They tried to grab me." She pointed back toward the alley. The officer immediately called it in, his hand going to his weapon. The black sedan she'd seen earlier screeched around the corner, saw the police presence, and sped away. The immediate threat was diverted but not gone. She had to get to the library. Using the police activity as cover, she moved north, sticking to side streets. She finally saw the imposing stone facade of the central library. She rushed up the steps, through the giant doors, and into the hushed, book-scented air. She found the fiction section, her eyes scanning for CC45. There it was, Moby Dick, a thick, old copy. She slid the ledger between its pages and reshelved it. Her part was done. Now she had to vanish again. As she turned to leave, a familiar voice spoke softly from behind a nearby bookshelf. "I knew you could do it." Adrian Volkov stepped into view. He was here in the library. It was the final shocking pivot. He hadn't been in some remote safe house. He'd been here waiting, watching. "The ledger is safe?" he asked. She nodded, stunned. "Why are you here? It's not safe." "It's the safest place," he said, glancing around. "They're looking for a running man, a hiding man. They're not looking for a man in a public library in the middle of the day, and I needed to see you, to tell you the last part of the plan." He guided her to a secluded reading nook. "The ledger names the deputy director, but it also contains bank routing numbers, offshore accounts, and a record of payments to a shell company owned by Senator Richard Bennett. The name hit her like a physical blow. Bennett, the family values senator from the news. The one who'd been quietly sponsoring legislation that would have deregulated the very industries the Voronin syndicate controlled. The corruption went even higher than they thought. When you place that ledger, Adrian continued, you aren't just leaving it for me. You're leaving it for an investigative journalist who has been building this story for 2 years. She's on her way here now. She will take it, verify it, and publish it. The syndicate can kill a witness. They can't kill a front-page story in every major newspaper. It was the ultimate payoff, not a courtroom but the court of public opinion. The evidence would be so explosive, so public, that any attempt to silence it would only confirm its truth. The system was too corrupted to trust with its own salvation. They had to go around it. And us? Alina whispered. Adrian handed her a small envelope. Inside were 2 passports, flight tickets, and a bank card. The journalist's fee for this story. Enough for both of us to disappear. Not as protected witnesses in a broken system, but as free people with new names and a clean slate, if you want it. He was offering her a choice, not a command. The man who'd once told her to stay still at the restaurant was now asking her to move forward with him. Outside the library windows, they saw the black sedan crawl past again, searching. The hunt was still on, but inside, for a moment, there was stillness. Alina looked at the tickets, then at Adrian. The man who'd upended her life. The man who'd trusted her with his. She thought of the waitress in the other story who'd found protection in the most dangerous man in the room. She wasn't a waitress. She was an architect, and maybe she could build something new. Okay, she said. The payoff unfolded over the next 48 hours. The journalist, a relentless woman named Anya Petrova, retrieved the ledger. Her story broke like a dam. Senator, justice official implicated in vast syndicate corruption. The evidence was irrefutable. The handwritten ledger, corroborated by the digital files, traced a river of dirty money from Voronin shell companies through Bennett's, Reform, PAC, and into the offshore account of the deputy director. The public outrage was instantaneous. The deputy director was arrested before lunch. Senator Bennett held a tearful press conference announcing his temporary step back from public duties before being indicted on charges of bribery and conspiracy. The Voronin syndicate, exposed and under immense scrutiny, fractured. Their political protection was gone. Their financial channels were frozen. In the chaos, the hunt for Adrian Volkov and the woman known as Clara Mitchell was deprioritized, then quietly buried by a Justice Department desperate to show it was cleaning house. On a cloudy morning, 2 people boarded a flight to Reykjavik, connecting to points unknown. They traveled on passports with names that had no history. In a quiet airport lounge, Alina finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the restaurant. That night at Il Silo, was it really just a mistake that I sat at your table? Adrian looked out at the tarmac, his expression unreadable. Then he told her the final, surprising truth. The reservation was under the name Rossi. I requested a specific booth, one visible from the bar. My contact, the marshal, was supposed to arrive separately and use that name. You gave the name Rossi. You went to the right table, Alina. You were just 2 hours early. The marshal was coming at 9. You sat down at 7. It wasn't the wrong table. It was the right table at the wrong, perfect time. She stared at him, the pieces snapping together with dizzying clarity. Her meticulousness, her habit of being early, the name on her credit card reservation. It was a convergence of a million small details, a cosmic error that was, in its own way, correct. She hadn't been a random variable. She had been a thread in the pattern, pulled into place by her own habits. She had saved him not by pure chance, but by being exactly who she was. He took her hand, the way he had in the restaurant, but this time there was no performance, just a quiet connection. You asked me once what happens when the hitmen realize their mistake, he said. They realize they lost, and we get to decide what comes next. The plane lifted into the air, leaving the hunted ground behind. The documentary's central promise, what happens when an ordinary person is pulled into the crosshairs, was resolved. She didn't just survive. She turned the system against itself. She became the architect of her own escape, and in doing so, helped bring down a corrupt empire. The story of Alina Rossi and Adrian Volkov faded from public view, another footnote in the endless war against organized crime. But the data, the patterns, remain. At least 2,700 contract killings are still ordered every year. The witness security program still protects its thousands. And in crowded restaurants everywhere, people still sit down at tables, unaware of the invisible threads of danger and destiny that might be converging around them at that very moment. It only takes one mistake, or one perfectly timed accidental. That thin, terrifying line between a normal evening and a life on the run is the most compelling truth of this story. It wasn't super spies or secret agents. It was an architect early for dinner, a man trying to survive, and a system so compromised it turned protection into a targeting list. The data doesn't lie. At least 2,700 contract killings are ordered globally every year. The U.S. Marshals protect over 19,000 souls in an endless, silent war. And attacks in public businesses like restaurants remain the most common setting for planned violence. We are surrounded by invisible conflicts, most of us just passing through the crossfire without ever knowing it. So what does the story of Alina and Adrian leave us with? Not just a tale of survival, but a blueprint. When the systems you're told to trust are broken, you must become your own first responder. You must learn to read the room, to trust your instincts when the story doesn't add up. The research is clear. Targeted violence is almost always preceded by observable warning signs. The hesitation of the hitmen, the flawed credentials of the imposters, the wrong code phrase, these were the cracks in their plan. Survival isn't about strength. It's about attention. It's about understanding that the world is not always as it seems, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room might be the only one you can trust. Their story ended in a quiet airport, but the questions it raises echo loudly. How deep does corruption go when the price is right? How many other witnesses are hidden in plain sight, living with names that aren't their own? And what would you do if you sat down at the wrong table and found yourself responsible for a stranger's life? These are not hypotheticals. They are the daily realities of the shadow war between organized crime and justice, a war fought in our courtrooms, our banks, and our quiet neighborhood restaurants. If you found yourself gripped by this journey, by the collision of ordinary life and extraordinary danger, then you understand the power of a story that reveals the hidden mechanics of our world. That's what we do here. We dive deep into the narratives that shape our reality, uncovering the truth behind the headlines and the human drama behind the data. If you want to join us on that exploration, to ensure you never miss a story that challenges what you think you know, then take a moment right now to subscribe to the channel. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support is what allows us to bring these meticulously researched, deeply human stories to light. It tells us you value this kind of storytelling, and it helps our community of curious minds grow. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this journey. Until next time, stay aware.